Welcome to this video on Evolution of Computers Part 1. This learning video will enable you to identify the history of computers and identify how computers came into existence since 1930s to 1960s. Many of the advances made by science and technology have depended upon the ability to process large amounts of data and perform complex mathematical calculations. The abacus was an important counting machine during the initial stages, where it was used until the late Middle Ages. It was followed by a series of improvements in mechanical counting machines that led up to the development of accurate mechanical adding machines in the 1930s. In June 1943, work began on the world's first electronic computer. This machine was a vast improvement over the mechanical calculating machines of the past because it used vacuum tubes instead of relay switches. It contained over 17,000 of these tubes, which were the same type tubes used in radios at that time. The first computer-like machine was the Mark I developed by a team from IBM and Harvard University. It used mechanical telephone relays to store information, and it processed data entered on punch cards. This machine was not a true computer since it could not make decisions. The invention of the transistor made smaller and less expensive computers possible. Although computers shrank in size, they were still huge by today's standards. Another innovation to the computers in the 60s was storing data on tape instead of punch cards. Key points discussed in this video. Many of the advances made by science and technology have depended upon the ability to process large amounts of data and perform complex mathematical calculations. The abacus was an important counting machine. Vast improvement over the mechanical calculating machines of the past because it used vacuum tubes instead of relay switches. The invention of the transistor made smaller and less expensive computers possible. Video will enable you to examine the evolution of computers before 1970s and explain the evolution of computers in 70s and 80s. Let us learn about the evolution of computers using a timeline. In 1936, Konrad Zuse invented the first programmable computer called Z1 computer. It read instructions from perforated 35mm films. In 1944, Howard Aiken and Grace Hopper invented the Harvard Mark I computer at the Harvard University. It was a 5-ton device with 760,000 separate pieces. It was initially used by the US Navy. In 1946, John Presper Eckert and John W. Moseley invented the ENIAC after the introduction of vacuum tubes in electronic devices. It used 20,000 vacuum tubes and needed 36 vacuum tubes to store a single digit of information. In 1947, the transistor was invented by John Bardeen, Walter Britton, and William Shockley. In 1951, the first commercial computer, UNIVAC 1, was introduced by John Presper Eckert and John W. Moseley. In 1953, IBM entered into the history of computers with IBM 701. It is the first scientific computer based on advanced architecture. In 1954, IBM developed the first successful high-level program called Fortran for numeric and scientific applications. It is a popular language in high-performance computing and used as a benchmark to rank supercomputers. In 1955, Stanford University and General Electric Laboratory developed the first dedicated computer for a banking industry called MICR, Magnetic Ink Character Recognition, for Bank of America. In 1958, Jack Kilby and Robert Noyce invented the integrated circuits (IC). It paved the way for future advancements in computers. In 1962, Steve Russell and MIT developed the first computer game, Space War. In 1960, Douglas Engelbart developed the first prototype of the mouse. It had a wooden shell and two metal wheels. He called it a mouse as the wire came out like a tail at one end. In 1969, ARPANET, the first network to use packet switching and TCP/IP suite, was built. It initially connected 4 universities in the network. In 1970, Intel developed the first dynamic RAM, Intel 1103. It replaced many later applications because of its small size and low price. In 1971, Faggy, Hoff, and Maser developed the microprocessor based on an idea proposed by a Japanese company, Busicom, to make a single chip for their calculator. In the same year, IBM developed a magnetic storage device called floppy disk. It was nicknamed as floppy to denote flexibility. In 1975, IBM introduced the first consumer computer, IBM 5100. Between 1976 and 1977, Apple was started by Steve Jobs and it introduced the Apple I and Apple II computers. Some other consumer computers like TRS-80 and Commodore PET computers were also introduced. In 1978, the first spreadsheet software, VisiCalc, was developed, and in 1979, the first word processor, WordStar, was developed. In 1981, IBM started the PC evolution by introducing IBM PC, a dedicated personal computer for consumer usage. In the same year, 1981, Microsoft introduced MS-DOS operating system for some specific processor-based computers. After its widespread usage, it became the operating system of the century. In 1983, the first PC with graphical user interface was introduced by Apple, Apple Lisa, and then the most affordable computer called Macintosh was developed. By 1985, computers started to evolve with the respective technologies, and since then, it started the friendly war between Apple and Microsoft. Key points discussed in this video. Invention of Z1 computer by Conrad Zuse in 1936. In 1946, ENIAC was invented using vacuum tubes. First commercial computer, UNIVAC, was invented in 1951. Introduction of Fortran, first high-level program developed by IBM. In 1945, Jack Kilby and Robert Noyce invented integrated circuits. Invention of microprocessor by Intel in 1971.